Hello again and welcome back. We're storming through this, aren't we?
Yeah, doing good, making good time.
We are. So this one today, we're going to be covering cards 25 through to 30.
Yeah.
So I hope if you've been watching, you've enjoyed yourself thus far. And please bear with us as we continue this journey through the Oracle of the Hekatean Path. So card number 25. Now, this one, I could just about pronounce it before you changed the name, and now I'm not sure. So
this is card 25, Anassa Pharmakon, the Queen of Witches.
Right.
For and obviously the keyword being sovereignty.
Right. Tell me about this one. This visually, I know this was one that you really appreciated and you were really happy with, wasn't it?
Yeah. It was a card. It was a card I definitely wanted to create because, as much as the notion of her as Queen of Witches is quite well established, both in antiquity and with modern devotees, there wasn't actually a specific name or epithet that actually encapsulates it. She's been referred to as Queen, sort of in and of itself, sometimes referred to like Queen of the Dead and things like that. But there was never anything that sort of linked this queenly aspect with the witches, even though they are inextricably linked.
Hence, now I think you talked about this in the intro, didn't you, when we were talking about hence the title change?
Yes. So initially it was Anassa Megissa, which is because of my very crude understanding of modern Greek. And so obviously Megissa in modern Greek, it roughly translates to witch. But when I was speaking to a native Greek speaker and devotee of the goddess, realized that obviously Anassa is an ancient term and Megissa is a modern term, and so you kind of splicing them together in a very sloppy kind of way.
I'll let you into a secret, look. I mean, you know my degree background. I did do a Bachelor of Divinity degree, but I have to admit I was crap at Greek, and I thought it would get better through the course of the 3 years, but it's so don't feel guilty about Greek mistakes. If you'd have left this to me, it would have been hideously botched, you know. So I think you probably did a better job than I would at this stage.
Yeah, and so it was only through conversation with this individual that we kind of toyed with a few variations on it. Obviously, the root word of witches, in a sense, for in antiquity was like pharmakeia, which was the root word of where we get things like pharmacy from, because it was all about working with herbs and drugs and poisons. And so we came up with this title of Pharmakon, which basically encapsulates witches as a plural. And yeah, it just once he'd sort of suggested that to me, it was one of those things of like, yep, that's it, we've got it.
Yeah.
And then obviously it came to formulating the image, and again I wanted to kind of bridge that gap between antiquity and modern influences. And so, and obviously I mentioned in the intro video, like there's nods to things like Macbeth and the Three Witches, but there's this very sort of empowering sense of working witchcraft under the light of the moon, under the eyes of the goddess, and it was just one of those images that, again, I think it was a fairly simple and straightforward one, wasn't it?
It was, and I think what was so lovely was this was one where, I mean, very often as an artist, I mean, I think, well, we both discovered this as we were going on, that you can have a vision in your head, but very often as the creative process goes on, what you end up with, even though you're happy with it, is not actually really what was in your head. And very often that gulf between the vision in your head and the vision in what is actually physically possible is often quite wide. I think what was lovely about this, from what I could gather from you, was that what we ended up doing was actually quite close to what was in your head in the first place anyway, wasn't it? And it was fairly easy to achieve. I loved your idea of actually having the relief of the goddess in the moon itself, and I think that works really well.
Yeah.
This was just a kind of, this was one of the fun images to do, because it just didn't really pose any problems. And also, when you know that it's ticking the boxes straight away, and it is also just a sort of, I just love this is a lovely atmospheric card. You know, it's steeped in mystery. Who wouldn't want to be the fly on the wall, you know, for this scene? You know, I would love to hear the incantation, you know.
Yeah. And again, you've got that ambiguity with the silhouette, because you don't know if those figures are facing the moon or if they're facing you. And just this whole, you know, the palette is all that very lunar light quality that just really nice.
I love the fact that, as you say, they could be circling the cauldron, they could be invoking the goddess, they could be, you know, venerating her as they see her in the moon. It's so many different things.
Yeah.
I think the one thing that I did want is that really cold monochrome lunar light. And I think, you know, I think it did work really well.
Yeah, and I think, you know, that this particular aspect of the goddess and this keyword of sovereignty comes from, you know, witches, despite having endured persecution and things throughout history, it's still a very empowering path for people to take, because it is about, you know, self-regulation, self-ethics, self-morals, power, you know, stepping into your power and owning it. And obviously Hecate, in this, you know, this context of queen of witches, of mother of witches, is very much almost the bestower of these, you know, these wise crafts and things like that. And so although it has sort of hints in antiquity without actually a label, I kind of wanted to sort of try and put a pin in it, and hopefully Anassa Pharmakon will be an epithet that people will use, you know, from, you know, in the modern terms now, you know, to expand their worship of the goddess, so that it continues to be, you know, an evolving and a living tradition.
I think for me as well, this is a really important card. Again, having come out of a background of evangelical Christianity, where witches, you know, over the centuries within patriarchal Christianity have been utterly demonized. And actually, as you walk away from that, you realize there was only one reason they were demonized, not because they were evil or because they were practicing evil. It's precisely what you've said. They were a threat, because so much of witchcraft is about self-discipline, self-determination. You know, there is a responsibility there. And I think, to me, this is one of the very powerful things in this deck, because it kind of celebrates, in effect, you know, this is kind of one of, I love this card. It's kind of one of those two fingers up to the patriarchy cards in the deck. You know, I mean, let's start celebrating witchcraft again. And actually, you know, because I think what depresses me is just the very warped view of what witchcraft traditionally was throughout our society. You know, it was kind of demonized as a black art, and, you know, invoking evil, which was actually anything but the majority of the reality was anything but. And I think for me, this is kind of, you know, with cards like this, it's kind of reclaiming that tradition of empowered femininity, you know, of empowered union with nature, and taking responsibility for, you know, for the use of natural forces. So was that part of what you saw? Because I mean, that was very much, I think, I mean, obviously I was coming from a very different perspective when we were working on this. But
No, definitely. I mean, I agree with all the points you just put there, you know, you just made there. And like you say, I mean, like anything, everything has its darker side, and everything has its evil people and such. No, but nothing is inherently evil as it is. It's the implementation or the understanding or misunderstanding of said thing. I mean, in the same respect where Christians of old used to be saying about how it was all love and God's love and stuff, but then there was this there was the fire and brimstone punishment thing, there was the torture, the Inquisition, and you think, how did those things exist alongside each other, because they're diametrically opposed?
But I suppose it does, it really brings to the fore, doesn't it, that you take any tradition which at its kernel is good and it can be misused by evil people. The tenets of witchcraft are generally are for the good, but then you have people that pervert that towards evil. But then again, it fascinates me, whenever the church would dare to criticize the practice of witchcraft, I'm thinking, well, the tenets of Christianity have been turned to the black arts on a number of occasions, and you still see it happening today. I think the modern equivalents of that, we've talked about. You look at sort of coercive religion, controlling religion, conversion therapy. To me, these are all the dark side. So it kind of, I think, for me, it's certainly. One of the things that I love is that this is kind of celebrating these ancient practices and challenging us to kind of reevaluate them from our societal perspective. And as you say, let's just hope that that particular title that you've given her, it was an improvised one, but let's hope that it does, that it does take hold, precisely for that reason. So I'll come off my soapbox now. That got me started on something I'm very passionate about. Number 26.
Yes, another one to get your tongue round.
Yeah, but I like this one. I have an affection for this image because this was a very early one, wasn't it? I think this was about the fifth or sixth card we did?
It was in the first dozen or so, I would say. Yeah. This is Epiphanous. I can't get my tongue around it. Epiphanous. No, I'm not going to say it properly.
Hang on. Should I try? I think it's Epiphanous Starte. Is that right?
Yeah.
Epiphanous Starte Thea, most manifest goddess. And the keyword on this one is diversity. So explain that to me.
So, I mean, again, this one kind of comes on from the previous one, in that as much as, there is all these historical aspects to the goddess, in a lot of modern times, to a lot of people, she has become this goddess of the marginalized, the people that are on the outside of the societal norms, that go against the status quos, that don't conform, etc. And so I liked the idea of her representing this diversity across all levels, and yet the image that we went with is quite not sort of abstract or ethereal, but it's not a static image as such. It can be interpreted different ways. The idea of the six-armed goddess holding different things in her tools on a horse-drawn chariot was actually inspired by a piece of art that priest and scholar Georgi Mishev from Bulgaria had done himself, because he's a phenomenal artist, does a lot of drawings of the gods and such. And it was just this notion of this horse-drawn chariot with the goddess, brandishing all of these, for all intents and purposes, these objects of power, these things that can be, utilized and, channeled through to different ends. So obviously we've got things like the key and the sword, the snakes, the whip, the torch, and then obviously the victory laurels and things all over and then obviously above is sort of the neo-pagan sort of triple moon symbol to illustrate the sort of the waxing and waning of history of the goddess's own sort of interpretations through time. And obviously the color palette is quite sort of, there's a bit of a rainbow in there. You interpret that in many different ways. But I thought that was a nice addition to sort of the concept of diversity, especially, these days where, LGBTQI+ is still stigmatized and still really struggling in a lot of areas.
The funny thing is that rainbow went in as a kind of, the rainbow rays went in as an intuitive addition before we'd actually, because that was an aspect we'd kind of discussed this card, and you discussed with me what you wanted, because this was one of the ones that I did remotely, wasn't it?
Yes.
And I kind of put the rainbow rays in intuitively, and then when you saw them, it was like, oh, you're 2 steps ahead, and it was something that went in for visual purposes, but then I obviously kind of just intuitively picked up on something there.
Yeah. And I think it was another one of those images that didn't really need much additional tweaking once we'd come up with it.
I don't think it did it? In fact, I don't remember actually doing anything to tweak this. I think this was kind of one of the rare instances where it was literally right first time, wasn't it? Oh, hang on, didn't we? No, we did. The only thing we did was we juggled round which tokens were in which hand.
Yeah, just to get a sort of sense of balance with them, really.
Yeah.
But it's one of those cards that when it does, like obviously we've been using our prototype decks, and when it does come up, there's a sense of immediacy, but also a sense of support that's there. Regardless of where you're coming from, it's all under the remit of the goddess. She doesn't have prejudices in the same ways as we might experience in society. She is all encompassing.
I think I love the fact that you chose to go with actually a really powerful towering image for this as well. I find this card very encouraging because, again, you just have a sense that she's got your back, in the most powerful way possible. It's one of the most, for me, this is one of the most life-affirming cards in the deck. It's one of the most joyful cards in the deck for me. I always love it when I turn this one over. It feels, it's funny because, I mean, the Sotira card is just so overwhelmingly bright and light, but this is the card in the deck that actually makes me feel the most happy, if that makes sense. And I think it is that sense of allyship, having your back, protecting you, not seeing you, a goddess who doesn't see you as anything less than,
Yes.
And a sense of a goddess who just sees everyone of value and of worth. And it's a very beautiful message. Okay. Now, we did a little bit of number change in here, didn't we? So this was originally further down the sequence, but this is card 27, the Devotee, with the keyword dedication.
Yes, so we've come out of the epithets now.
Okay.
The last one, 26, I'm not even going to try and pronounce it because I'm tripping over my tongue, but 26 was the final card of the goddess's epithet.
Right.
And the next cards in the sequence all relate to aspects of devotion and sort of symbols that are linked with her. And so I thought where better a place to start than the devotee themselves. And again, I think this is one of those cards that adequately bridges the gap between past and present, because we have these we have the statues and the sort of temple column and the candles and the the burning censer and things like that. But then we have these, again, ambiguous silhouettes that could be any of us, sort of in a sort of posture of sort of praise, and then this fiery sort of almost ethereal spirit of the goddess above in like a flaming aurora kind of thing. And it was just it's a very animated card. I find when I view it and I look at it, it's, even though it's a static image, it's animated. There is a lot of mutable energy in it.
I love the fact that you kind of wanted that sort of auroral mist kind of energy that the goddess emerges out of. I love the fact that you wanted that also sort of sweeping around the figures in the foreground as well. I love the fact that their arms are outreach and they are both touching the Strophalos wheel. That when we were putting this together, that just spoke really strongly to me of them actually physically touching goddess energy. That wheel in this image for me is the point of contact. That's where they touch her personally, and it's in some ways it's a gentle image, on other ways it's not. It's quite a powerful, turbulent image, but there is just a sort of, funny enough, there is just a gentleness about it, regardless of the power and energy in it. It feels to me it's like a temple interior that I would want to step into, because it's warm, it's dark, it's reassuring, but it's lit.
Yeah, I mean the main inspiration behind the sort of spirit of the goddess above the statue is from the ancient practice of what they would term as ensouling statues.
Okay.
So they would view the statues in the temples as basically being representations of the deity.
Yeah.
So the temple would be the deity's house, and you wouldn't be just swanning in with muddy boots and things like that. It was all about the god's domain. And when the priests and priestesses would carry out ritual to these ensouled statues at certain times, it was said that the statues came to life, that they moved, that aspects of the goddess or the god's presence was illustrated through the statue itself. And so I kind of wanted this notion of these devotees dedicating themselves to the goddess, and then this sort of fiery living energy emanating out of this, what would for what most people would look at as being a static statue. I mean, if you go to the museums across the world where there's Greco-Roman statues that have actually come from Greco-Roman temple finds and stuff, you've got to remember that they're not just static images, and they weren't just pretty things.
They were never meant to be viewed that way, were they?
They were objects of devotion, and basically an embodiment on this plane of higher deific forces.
You see, we are of the Ray Harryhausen generation. See, we grew up watching Sinbad and Jason and the Argonauts and Clash of the Titans when we were kids, and I loved it. I can remember Jason and the Argonauts being one of my favorite films as a kid. I think I went to see it at the cinema, and it was always a treat when it came on. But of course, it was when the figurehead of Hera on the Argo came to life, and it was Honor Blackman talking out of the ship's figurehead. But better still, with Clash of the Titans, when the giant statue of Thetis came to life.
Yeah, Maggie Smith's
with
head
Maggie Smith.
On
the problem
the
is, I can't watch it and take it seriously now, because I mean, whenever Maggie Smith's eyes open on the statue, I'm waiting for the Dowager Countess to come out with one of her pearls of wisdom.
Oh, see, that's where we differ, you see, because obviously I've never really got into Downton. So when I see it now, I just keep expecting her to take points off Hufflepuff.
Oh no, the Dowager Countess is my spirit animal. That's the problem, But much as we joke, I think it was an aspect of that tradition around ritual statues that those films beautifully captured. There was the expectation that they were the embodiment of the living god or goddess, and that statue could come to life, for the god or goddess to communicate to you from. And like you say, this does feel like a very reassuring house. I think when I look into this scene, it's what I would want a temple to be. It's kind of that secret mystical place, with darkness but bright light at the same time. It's funny, because how do you capture visually that sense of dedication? I was glad you kind of had a really good brief for this one, because I wouldn't have known where to start but I think you succeeded.
Well, hopefully, hopefully I have.
Yeah.
And again, you can interpret this in different ways. You can envision yourself as being one of the silhouettes. Another way that I interpret it is sometimes when we are either looking to dedicate ourselves further to the goddess, or we're looking to progress.
Mhm.
These maybe are the priest and priestess of this temple, and their
Yeah.
arms outstretched, cradling this wheel. It's almost like there's a gatekeeper aspect to it. You've got to
I haven't thought of that.
pass through that first before
Yeah.
you can, reach the goddess.
I really
Um,
hadn't thought of that because I'd just seen them as the devotees, but then priests and priestesses are devotees in an equal manner, aren't they? But they also guide us,
yeah.
you know? Yeah, it's very, very powerful.
Mm.
So that was, I've got my numbers mixed up. So that
27.
27. Okay, right. So again, what was 27 had a number change and is now 28, isn't it? So
Yes.
this next one is the path. So
That's right. Yeah. So obviously, devotee being the first one we wanted to come to, what does a devotee do when they start, looking into Hecate and following Hecate? It's the start of a journey. It's the start of walking a Hekatean path. And that can last for however long it's going to last. It could last, years. It could last your whole lifetime. It could be a fleeting experience that where you just need to learn something, or find something out, and then you move on to other things.
Yeah.
But I just I liked the idea that where we came up with this, of this almost dreamscape, in a way that there's elements of water, and there's mountains, and there's this moon with the goddess face looking down, and then this very small, by comparison, silhouette of like a journeyman or journey person at the start of the visible path, but maybe you don't know what the path behind has been.
Yeah.
And just ever so slightly, you can see as the path goes towards the mountains and the dark, you can see that it's it's not a straight path. It has bends and turns, which is perfectly illustrative of at least my experiences with my journey with Hecate, is that it's not a straight road from A to B, and there are times where if the clouds come and occlude that moon, you might not see where the path is, you might fall in the water, you might take the wrong turn. There's so much potential in this simple image of the path, but it's all very much going to relate to how you personally view your journey, and obviously where you are on it when you do a reading, if this one comes out, and then what is around it, and how that is going to influence where you're going. I mean, it's, for instance, say you get this card, and then you've got the crossroads card next to it, so you're coming up to a crossroads, so that it's almost like being forewarned is forearmed, kind of thing. But yeah, I just liked the sort of dreamlike quality to this.
I love the fact that what you asked me to create with this as well, we can only see this section of the path. I mean, obviously you say you can't see what's gone already, but the path disappears into the mountains, but it's as if that was a metaphor to me, that you very often, all that's revealed to you is what you need to know for that step of your journey. And then it's only when you get to that next stage that you will then see the rest of the next section of the path that will be illuminated. And for all we know, you could be looking back, and where you've come from could be obscured by that stage. But we only see what is in effect a very small part of this journey. But I love the fact that because there's layer upon layer of mountains, that this is a journey that actually has to go a long way. So it does. I think for me, whenever I've drawn this one, it really talks to me about pacing my journeys as well, and it's also on a very practical level, whether it's a spiritual journey, a spiritual discipline, or a physical journey. It's actually about manageable chunks, and we're given what we need for whichever whichever chunk of the journey that we're actually, that we're sort of tackling at the time.
Yeah, and it can have, that 10 of wands type energy, like you say. It's about not trying to look at it in its entirety and figure out what you're going to do from the start to the finish.
Yeah.
And the other thing I kind of liked as well is the way that the face in the moon she's watching over everything. But if you look at it one way, she can see where that path's going. She's looking, beyond those mountains and where the rest of that journey is going. And again, so then it instills that sense of just having faith in her that you're on the right path, and you've got everything that you need to succeed, basically.
She has that much higher perspective, because ultimately she's higher than the highest mountain within that image. And it's, again, there's something very reassuring about that, knowing that from her perspective, at that height in the sky, she can see the whole path. Start through to finish with all of its obstacles and stages. But again, that's reassuring again, in that, we only have the vision of the section of the path that we're on at the time. But then there is that sense that you're still being guided, and that you'll be given what you need when you need it. Yeah.
And that's why I chose initiation as the keyword for this, because an initiation of any sort is a journey. It's it's embarking on something that's going to take a period of time, that's going to require energy and effort, and that and that you might have setbacks on, or you might have obstacles to surmount. And I just thought that the two kind of, especially following on from the Devotee, they kind of really worked quite well as sort of natural progression.
Yeah. In a way, you could see the temple on the Devotee card as the gateway to the journey. That's the beginning that we can't see. You've moved out of the temple and onto the pathway by the time you get into this, this next card, haven't you? Yeah. Now, number 29.
Yes.
This is one of my real visual favorites. It's simple, but it's, I think we discussed this in the intro video, didn't we? We didn't set out to be photographically real here. We set out to do something that was quite surreal, and I love it. This is the 29, the new moon, and with the keyword of beginnings.
Yeah. So in ancient sort of Greece and such, the calendars were lunar based. They followed the calendars on a lunar cycle, and their days tended to go from sunset to sunset rather than like dawn to sunset, like like a solar based calendar that we're used to. So the new moon, which to them was the first sighting of that sliver of moonlight in the sky, that was the start of a new month, and then the rest of the month would progress from there. And we, as modern sort of witches and pagans, are fully aware that the moon itself is full of potential and symbolism, and obviously the new moon is a start of something fresh. It's a place to sort of kick things off. But the way that I've wanted this card to sort of come to life in this not quite accurate composition is basically because of there's a tale from the Roman period, where basically this symbol of the crescent and the star that we still see today on like Turkish flags and things. Basically, the story behind that was that Hecate had warned basically what was Byzantium then, with now modern day Istanbul. But basically, there'd been prayers and stuff to stave off basically like an attack and invasion from of Macedonians. And basically it said that this crescent and star appeared in the sky and illuminated the plains or whatever sufficiently so that they could see the Macedonians approaching, and
Oh,
therefore, repel an attack. And then ever since then, it became this motif that was, you'd find it on coins with Hecate's head on one side and the star and crescent on the other. So I wanted a sort of simplistic nod to that.
yeah.
Probably not quite well known aspect, because it when people look at crescent and star, they do they automatically associate it with the sort of Islamic undertones, but
Yeah.
yet it's got this a little bit older sort of association with Hecate. So I kind of wanted to put that in there, so that even if people don't know about that, they can kind of go and find out some more.
Mm-hmm. So the star is this? Is it the morning star, or is it?
I think it was meant to be. It would it would have been one of the the planetoid stars.
So it would have been either Mercury or Venus or something like that.
Something like that. I mean, there are other references where Hecate's torches are sometimes seen as the evening and morning stars.
Okay.
But it was basically just this. It was clear that obviously the new moon had started, and that one of the planets were obviously quite close. That it was bright enough to see, and then they obviously equated the two as being. I mean, you've got to think about these times where there's no light pollution, really, not like how we would imagine it. What we think when we look at the night sky is probably nothing like what it was when where cities were pretty much in darkness.
Yeah, you only have to get yourself out to some of the darker parts of the British countryside, where there might still be a bit of light pollution on the horizon, but for the most part, I think about whenever I go to the lakes, I always love visiting the Castlerigg Stone Circle in Keswick. If you've got a clear night up there, because the town is down in the valley and Castlerigg is way up the fell by that stage. There is it's one of the best vantage points for the night sky in the country, and it really makes you realize how much we don't see living in urban areas. I can remember the first time I went there, that was the first time I'd seen what I would say was a true night sky, and as a kid I grew up thinking that there was a star here and a star there across the sky, and whereas the reality is anything but. I think if we went into space where there was no sort of atmospheric aberration, I think we probably really would get a shock. It always makes me laugh on sci-fi programs as well. Blake 7 was fabulous for that. Their idea of the ship floating in space would be like a black backdrop with a few holes poked in it and white light shining through the back. So I mean, there'd be about like sort of 10 stars per galactic sector. Which is quite far from the truth. And this does pay homage to that, doesn't it? We didn't go for photorealism, but at the same time we've gone for the spirit of it.
Yeah.
And I do have a real soft spot for this card because of the scale that it evokes, and the splendor that it evokes. So now number 30. So this is quite the opposite. We've gone from the new moon to the full moon.
Yes.
With the keyword of illumination.
Yeah, so I mean that's pretty much a given when we think about obviously a clear full moon night. It's very illuminating, but I think this was another one of those early cards, wasn't it?
Yeah, we did make a few changes because the basics are all there, but I changed the torches at some stage. Replaced the torches, and it kind of. I think as well, I'd kind of got into the feel of the style we were creating with this deck by that stage, and also I'd kind of done a lot of work around creating fire effects. So we swapped the torches over, and I think I redid the fire effects. But the basics of the image are more or less how you described it initially, and
and I took some inspiration from the pagan ritual of drawing down the moon, which is it's used in modern witchcraft circles, but there is an antiquity side to it because the witches of Thessaly were said to draw the moon down, with their magics to enable them to do other magics. So there is, you know, this figure of this arm outstretched, you know, devotee or priestess, literally, you know, drawing the moon so close that her arms are almost, you know, completely around it, and then
Yes.
obviously flanked by the torches, you know, that can be seen as the illuminated quality of the goddess, and you know, and her torches. It I find that it's a great card for literally shedding light in a reading. If it, you know, depending on where it crops up, it's very much it's going to bring something to the fore of the explanation. And you know, as much as we think we associate the sun with, you know, laying everything bare, when you factor the moon in, especially when you factor in more sort of mystical and magical aspects, you start to look at things like, you know, the unconscious and the, you know, dream language, and you know, even things like the shadow self. It's about looking at those other aspects and those other things that don't always necessarily get illuminated.
And it's interesting with this deck, isn't it? I mean, with the tarot, you know, you have sun, moon, and star cards within the major arcana. That's something that we don't have here. I mean, I think the nearest you would get to the sun card in this deck would be the Sotira card, wouldn't it? But then that's more to do with the heavenly and divine radiance. I think in terms of astral bodies, this is the brightest. The full moon is the brightest light in this deck, isn't it? You know, the beauty is we've got three moon cards in this deck, which is what I love. But this is the bright light of the deck, anyway.
Yeah. And I just, again, it's one of those cards that it's quite simple in its execution, but it just encapsulates that you know, you can look to the moon, you can look to the goddess, and you can draw down this power to either illuminate something that you can't see, or you know, to give you the intuitive bypass to, you know, in order to figure something out. It doesn't necessarily have to be taken literally as though, okay, you know, there's some light and I can see something.
Yeah.
You know, it can be, but it can, you know, but then that's dependent on I would say the prominence of the torches in this card. If they're more prominent than the moon, then I would take that more as a literal shining a light on it. Whereas if the moon, it seems more the focus, especially if the other cards around it do, then that's going to be more of the deeper sort of mystical side of illumination and what that is. And I mean, you know, the whole thing is about a journey. It's about being on a Hekatean path. And, you know, I often refer to the cards as signposts on this path, you know, from crossroad to crossroad, as we navigate it, you know, to the best of our ability. That these are the little pointers that say, don't go down there, or watch yourself if you're going over that way. And I think when this one sort of crops up, you can kind of almost breathe a little bit easier, because you know you're actually going to be able to see what's coming for a period anyway.
I think one of the other things that I loved about this was that, I mean, you kind of introduced me to the concept of drawing down the moon. But I mean, with the moon's sort of, you know, the fact that the goddess is so closely associated with the moon, that drawing down the moon ceremony feels to me like a very physical and tangible invocation. You know, it's, you know, you're not just drawing down the moon, you're drawing down the goddess. And there's something very, very beautiful about that. I love this because, you know, the priestess on this card, because her arms sort of encompass the moon, she could almost be holding it up. There is a sense that almost of the moon touching her, and, you know, the energy and the power of the goddess flowing through that touch. It's a simple card, but just very magical, very mystical. So, and on that note, we've come to the end of this one.
Yes.
So next time we are covering cards 31 through to 36.
Yeah.
So once again, we hope you've enjoyed it. Do join us next time as we continue our journey through the Oracle of the Hekatean Path. Anyway, take care, and we'll see you soon.